A letter written in looping ink, beginning with 5 words that made her heart stumble: I see you every day. Has someone ever stalked you before, to an extent where you got anonymous flowers and letters and you were in dire need to know who they were? Let us know in the comments, we'd love to hear your story. Amelia Hart was the kind of woman people forgot in a crowd, though not by design. She liked the quiet. In fact, she had built her life around it. The small-town library where she worked smelled faintly of paper dust and lemon polish, and she could navigate its stacks blindfolded. Every day followed a reliable script. Unlock doors. Turn on lamps. Return books. Smile politely to patrons. But lately, something new had entered her careful routine, something that didn't belong to the catalog or the calendar. The first letter had appeared 2 weeks ago, folded neatly and slipped into the pages of Pride and Prejudice. No name, no address. Just a short, impossibly tender note written in dark blue ink, telling her she had the kindest eyes in the room. She had almost convinced herself it was a prank. Almost. This morning, as the rain streaked the library windows and the radiator hissed faintly, Amelia found the second one. Same thick paper. Same deep blue ink. But longer this time. You don't see me, but I see you. You move as if you're afraid to take up too much space. But when you smile, really smile, you fill the whole room. And I hope one day you'll see me too. Her fingers trembled slightly as she refolded the letter. A warmth pooled somewhere beneath her ribs, and for the rest of the morning, she kept catching herself staring at the front doors, as if the writer might walk through. Across town, in a high-rise office that overlooked the river, Ethan Marlowe closed a video call without hearing half of what his finance director had just said. His mind was on the library again. From his office window, the city looked like a puzzle he had already solved. Glittering towers, orderly streets, predictable returns. But Ethan hadn't felt truly alive in years. Not since before the accident that had taken his fiancée and convinced him love was something you lost if you weren't careful. The library had become his secret refuge. He had first gone there to escape a particularly grueling shareholder meeting, looking for silence, anonymity. Then he'd seen her, Amelia, reshelving books in the far corner, her hair pulled into a loose knot, her cardigan sleeves pushed to her elbows. She didn't see him. But he saw her. He kept coming back. Never spoke. Never lingered long enough for her to notice him. But something about her quiet grace cracked a piece of the armor he wore. So he began to write. Words he could never say out loud. Words he didn't dare sign. Back in the library, Amelia tucked the second letter into her bag. She wasn't the type to daydream about strangers, but these letters, gentle, observant, impossibly sincere, felt like they belonged to someone who truly knew her. Or wanted to. By closing time, the rain had stopped, and the streets glistened under the amber glow of the street lamps. Amelia locked the library doors, glancing once more at the table where she'd found the note. Her pulse quickened at the thought, tomorrow, there might be another one. If you were Amelia, would you feel flattered, intrigued, or uneasy about finding anonymous love letters? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because this is where her life begins to change. 2 days passed before the third letter arrived. It was late afternoon, and the library's golden light made the dust in the air look like drifting flecks of magic. Amelia was shelving a stack of biographies when she noticed an unfamiliar hardcover sitting at the edge of the table. The Great Gatsby. She picked it up, and there it was again. A folded sheet of thick cream paper, warm from where it had been resting between pages. Her heart leapt. She glanced around quickly. Only 2 students at the far table, a man browsing newspapers, and Mrs. Turner in her usual seat near the fireplace. No one was looking her way. The letter began simply. You love words because they don't interrupt. You love books because they don't judge. I wonder if anyone has ever told you that you deserve someone who listens to you as carefully as you listen to them. I would like to be that someone. Amelia's chest tightened in a way that wasn't unpleasant. It was as if this unseen writer had been standing beside her, watching her life unfold in quiet moments no one else noticed. She sat at the staff desk, turning the letter over in her hands. Whoever this was, they understood her. And yet, there was the ache of not knowing. Was it someone who came in daily? Someone she'd passed on the street without seeing? Up on the mezzanine, Ethan lingered behind a tall bookshelf, heart hammering in his chest. He had left the book there 20 minutes earlier, timing it so she'd find it before closing. From his vantage point, he could just see her at the desk, the letter in her hand. She was smiling, not broadly, just enough for her eyes to soften. He wanted to take a photograph of that moment, and keep it forever. For a second, he almost stepped out, almost spoke her name. But fear gripped him. What if, when she learned who he was, she thought it was all a game? That he was playing with her life the way tabloids claimed men like him did? Better to wait. Better to let the letters speak until she was ready. That evening, Amelia couldn't stop thinking about the words. She reread them twice at her kitchen table, tea growing cold beside her. Her apartment was small but cozy, plants on the windowsill, a stack of paperbacks by the bed. She had chosen this life because it was safe. But now, she wondered what it would be like to risk something. The next morning, she found herself dressing with more care than usual. A soft blue dress instead of her usual sweater. A touch of lipstick. When she unlocked the library doors, her eyes immediately scanned the room, searching faces without meaning to. A man in a tailored charcoal coat caught her attention briefly, tall, dark-haired, flipping through the travel section. She didn't know his name, but there was something precise about the way he moved, as if every gesture mattered. Before she could place why he seemed familiar, he set the book back and walked out. Later, as the library emptied, Amelia lingered by the desk, half hoping, half dreading that another book would be waiting with a surprise inside. But nothing came. The disappointment surprised her in its sharpness. Ethan, from the driver's seat of his black town car parked across the street, watched her through the window. He had almost gone back in. Almost. Instead, he reached into his briefcase, pulled out a fresh sheet of cream paper, and began to write. If I could tell you who I am, I would. But for now, I hope these letters remind you that you are seen. That you are more than the quiet you live in. He folded it carefully, already knowing the exact book where he'd place it tomorrow. The fourth letter arrived not in a book, but in Amelia's personal desk drawer. She found it on a Wednesday morning when she reached for a pen. The sight of that familiar cream paper both thrilled and unsettled her, because no one should have access to this drawer but her. She hesitated before unfolding it, scanning the library for unfamiliar faces. Sometimes I wish I could speak to you in person. But the truth is, I'm afraid that if I do, I won't have the courage to tell you what I've written here. Afraid you might turn away. She read it twice, torn between warmth and wariness. The handwriting was elegant, the words thoughtful, but the delivery felt intrusive. Someone had been close enough to touch her things. Amelia locked the note back in the drawer, telling herself she needed to be careful. Yet, for the rest of the day, her eyes kept flicking toward the door. Ethan was furious with himself. He hadn't intended to cross a line, but yesterday, when she'd stepped into the archive room, he'd seen the chance. The drawer was unlocked. He'd slipped the note inside in less than a second. Now, watching from the mezzanine, he saw her posture, stiff, guarded. She didn't linger with the letter as before. She tucked it away quickly, glancing around like someone who'd heard footsteps in the dark. It stung. This was the risk he had tried to avoid, that the magic of the letters would turn into something else, fear, suspicion. That evening, Amelia sat at her kitchen table, the letter lying unopened beside her cup of tea. She thought about her younger self, the one who used to believe in serendipity and grand gestures. That girl had been burned before, by people who weren't what they claimed to be. Was she romanticizing a stranger who could be anyone? She imagined telling her friend Sophie about the letters, but stopped herself. Sophie would only worry, tell her to stop reading them, maybe even go to the police. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to throw them away. The next day, Ethan didn't leave a letter. From his corner table, he watched Amelia go about her routine. She looked tired, distracted. He wanted to fix what he'd broken, but how could he explain without breaking the mystery entirely? The truth was, anonymity was as much his shield as it was her puzzle. In the letters, he could be anyone, gentle, open, fearless. In real life, he was a man with headlines written about him, a bank account that made people suspicious, and a past that kept him alone. By the week's end, Amelia noticed the absence. No new notes. No unexpected discoveries between book pages. Instead of relief, she felt a strange hollowness, as though the air in her little world had gone stale. She told herself this was good. That whoever had been watching her had moved on. So why did she find herself lingering by the romance section each morning, fingers brushing the spines as if something might be waiting? On Friday, Ethan walked past the library without going in. The urge to see her was strong, but the risk of breaking whatever fragile trust he had left was stronger. That night, he sat in his penthouse, the city spread out below like a glittering sea, and began to write again. He didn't know if he'd ever deliver it, but the words came anyway. I think I've made a mistake. I never wanted you to feel unsafe. The truth is, I write these letters because I don't know how to speak without them. And because you've brought something back into my life I thought was gone forever. He stared at the page for a long time before slipping it into an envelope and setting it aside. It happened on a Tuesday. The library's heating system had given up mid-morning, and the cold had settled into the building like a stubborn guest. Amelia was at the front desk, wrapped in a cardigan, when the fire alarm blared without warning. She ushered the handful of patrons toward the exit, her voice calm even as her own pulse raced. Outside, the sky was gray and spitting snow. The fire department arrived quickly, but the crowd lingered at the curb, rubbing their hands together for warmth. Library is closed until we're sure it's safe, one of the firefighters announced. Amelia started to head toward the side street when a deep voice beside her said, "You look frozen. There's a cafe across the street. Come on." She turned and found herself looking up into the face of the man she'd noticed once before, tall, dark-haired, his charcoal coat dusted with snowflakes. His eyes were striking, though there was something guarded in them. She hesitated. "That's kind, but..." "You'll be warmer inside," he said, tone gentle but certain. "Just until they let you back in." For reasons she couldn't explain, she agreed. The cafe was crowded with people who'd also been evacuated from nearby shops. They found a small table near the window. "Ethan," he said as they sat, offering his hand. "Amelia." He smiled faintly. "I know." She tilted her head, surprised. "You've been in the library before?" "A few times," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "You're hard to miss." Her cheeks warmed. Most people would disagree. Most people don't pay attention. His gaze lingered just long enough for her to feel its weight before he looked away. The conversation was easy in some ways, awkward in others. He asked about the library's history, her favorite books, whether she'd ever considered writing her own. She asked about his work, and he gave vague answers, consulting, travel, a bit of everything. There were pauses, but not the uncomfortable kind. And yet, beneath it all, Amelia sensed something, like a question he wasn't asking, or a truth he was holding back. At one point, when she looked out the window, she thought she saw the faintest curve of cream-colored paper peeking from the inside pocket of his coat. Her heartbeat stuttered, but she said nothing. When the firefighter came in to announce the library had been cleared, Amelia stood reluctantly. "Thanks for the coffee," she said. "My pleasure." He hesitated. "Maybe I'll stop by the library again. This time, I'll make sure you see me." She smiled, unsure why his words felt so layered. "You're welcome anytime." Ethan walked her back, every step a battle between caution and impulse. He had never been this close to telling her. Part of him wanted to hand her the envelope in his pocket right then, to watch her eyes as she read. But the other part, the part still afraid she'd see his name and retreat, kept his hand still. From the library door, she watched him go, her thoughts tangled. He was a stranger, technically. And yet, she felt as though they'd already spoken countless times, on paper, in words she wasn't entirely sure were his. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. The image of the cream envelope in his coat wouldn't leave her mind. Was she imagining it? Was she so eager to know the letter writer that she was seeing clues everywhere? Meanwhile, Ethan sat at his desk, pen in hand, finally writing the letter he'd been avoiding. "I met you today. Not the way I wanted, but maybe the way I needed. I hope when you find this, you'll know it was me all along." He didn't know if he'd be brave enough to deliver it. But for the first time, the thought of hiding felt worse than the risk of telling. It started with a name in the return log. Amelia was sorting the day's book returns when she noticed it, Ethan Whitmore. She knew that name. Not from the library's list of regulars, but from somewhere else, magazines maybe, or an article she'd skimmed months ago. She frowned, pulling at the thread of memory until it caught. Yes, Ethan Whitmore, the reclusive billionaire investor who'd made headlines for buying up half a dozen historic buildings in the city, restoring them instead of demolishing them. He was known for avoiding interviews and appearing at charity events only briefly, if at all. Her mind replayed their coffee shop conversation, his careful answers, the way he'd studied her without quite meeting her eyes for too long. If he was that Ethan Whitmore, why had he come to the library at all? And why did the idea make her think, not of money or power, but of the envelope in his coat pocket? That afternoon, he came in. No letter. No hidden gestures. Just a quiet hello and a request for a book on early 20th century architecture. She fetched it for him, and as she set it on the desk, she said, "You're Ethan Whitmore, aren't you?" His pause was brief, but telling. "I am. You didn't mention that before." "I didn't think it was relevant." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like someone bracing for the way the world usually shifted when people learned who he was. Ethan had spent years watching that shift happen, smiles becoming wider, eyes sharper, questions more calculated. But Amelia's expression wasn't greedy or giddy. It was conflicted. "I read about your restorations," she said finally. "It's impressive." "Not impressive enough to make you trust me," he said quietly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I'm not sure trust is the word. It's just, when someone keeps a big part of themselves hidden, it makes you wonder what else they're not saying." He almost told her then. About the letters. About how each one had been written in the hope of connecting without the weight of his name attached. But instead, he said, some things are easier to share in writing than face to face. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but he noticed. Later that evening, Amelia found herself in Sophie's kitchen, helping chop vegetables for dinner. She broke her silence about Ethan, though she left out the letters. "You think he's hiding something?" Sophie asked. "I know he's hiding something. But it's not shady. It's personal. And I think it has to do with why he comes to the library." Sophie gave her a look. "If you're interested, you're going to have to decide if the mystery is part of the attraction, or part of the problem." Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his study, staring at an old photograph propped on the bookshelf. It was of a much younger him, sitting on the steps of his grandmother's house with a book in his lap. She had been the one to take him to the library every Saturday, telling him that wealth could buy many things, but never curiosity or kindness. After she passed, he inherited her estate, including her collection of first editions. The library had become his refuge, but also the place where his shyness with strangers had rooted itself. Speaking in public was still difficult. Writing had been his only way to say the things he truly meant. And Amelia, she reminded him of the librarians who had known him then. Gentle, attentive, content to let him exist quietly. He had begun the letters because, in some strange way, they made him feel 12 years old again, clutching a note in the corner of the reading room. The next morning, Amelia arrived at the library early. On her desk was a book she didn't remember leaving there, its title, Letters of the Heart. Inside, between the pages, was a single sheet of cream paper. "You know my name now, but I hope you'll still want to know me. The letters were never about hiding. It was the only way I knew how to tell you the truth about how you've changed my days." Her hands shook slightly as she folded the letter back into the book. She wasn't sure if she was more startled by the confession, or by the relief that came with it. If you discovered someone you were starting to like had been writing to you anonymously, would the reveal make you feel betrayed or moved? Would their reason change your answer? Drop your thoughts. I want to see how forgiving people really are when romance and secrecy mix. The library was quiet when Ethan walked in that afternoon, but Amelia felt the air shift the moment she saw him. The book Letters of the Heart still sat in her office, its hidden page await in her mind all day. He approached the counter, but before he could speak she said, "We should talk." His brow furrowed. "Somewhere private?" She nodded toward the small staff room behind the desk. It was barely big enough for 2 chairs and a coffee machine, but at least they wouldn't be overheard. When the door closed behind them, Amelia didn't waste time. "I found your letter this morning." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he met her gaze. "Then you know it's been me all along." "I do." She folded her arms, not in defiance but to keep her hands from trembling. "What I don't understand is why. Why not just say something?" "Because I didn't want my name to be the reason you listened," he said. "I wanted the words to matter, not the man behind them." "That's noble," she said, though her tone carried doubt, "but it's also dishonest. You've been in this library, talking to me, watching me, while pretending you were a stranger." "I was a stranger," he countered. "I was trying to stop being one." For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the coffee machine. Amelia looked away. Do you know what it's like to spend weeks wondering who's behind these words? To hope it's someone you can trust, only to find out they've been standing in front of you this whole time and saying nothing. Yes, Ethan said, and his voice was softer now. Because I've spent weeks wondering if you'd want to know me at all if you did. Her eyes snapped back to his. That's not fair. It's honest. The sharpness in his tone made her flinch. He noticed, and the heat in his own chest cooled into regret. Amelia, I never meant to make you feel played with. The letters were the only way I knew how to give you what I couldn't say out loud. She swallowed hard. And now that I know? He took a step closer. Now I hope you'll let me keep saying them. But to your face this time. Her pulse stumbled at the proximity, but the unease didn't vanish. I don't know if I can just pretend the way you went about this doesn't bother me. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to decide if the connection we've built is worth forgiving the way it started. Her breath caught. Forgiveness. The word landed heavier than she expected. She thought of the letters, how they had been a light in her days, how they'd made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. And yet, she couldn't ignore the knot in her chest, the part of her that felt tricked. I need time, she said finally. He nodded, though his eyes betrayed disappointment. Take it. I'll wait. When Ethan left, the staff room felt smaller. Amelia sat down, letting the quiet wrap around her like a too-tight blanket. She could still smell his cologne, subtle, warm, and infuriatingly pleasant. That night, Ethan paced his study. He'd finally said the words, but instead of relief, he felt hollow. Maybe Sophie had been right when she told him once that he didn't know how to be vulnerable without hiding behind grand gestures. Maybe this was proof. He sat at his desk and began writing, not a letter this time, but a page for himself. A confession he might never give her. I thought I was protecting something fragile. Maybe I was just protecting myself. Meanwhile, Amelia sat in bed, rereading one of the earliest letters, one about rain on library windows, and how the writer imagined sharing that quiet with her. It was still beautiful. Still real. But could she separate the words from the secrecy? She turned out the light, unsure which unsettled her more, the thought of letting him in, or the thought of losing the only person who had ever written her words like those. If you were Amelia, would Ethan's explanation be enough for you to forgive him right away? Or would you, like her, need time before deciding? Tell me honestly, do grand romantic gestures excuse secrecy? The next few days at the library felt hollow. Ethan didn't come in. No books reserved, no quiet hellos, no lingering at the counter. Amelia told herself it was for the best. Space was what she'd asked for, but the truth was, the absence gnawed at her. She found herself glancing toward the door each time it opened. It was silly. She'd said she needed time, and he was giving it to her. Wasn't that what she wanted? On the fourth day, Sophie stopped by during her lunch break, bringing sandwiches and that look, half concern, half I told you. You miss him, Sophie said flatly, unwrapping her sandwich. Amelia hesitated. I miss the way things felt before I knew. The letters. The anticipation. And you think you can get that back without the man who wrote them? Sophie raised a brow. Amelia didn't answer. Across the city, Ethan was pacing again, but this time in the middle of an almost finished ballroom in one of his renovation projects. The place echoed with the sound of his footsteps. His foreman was asking questions about flooring, timelines, budgets, but his mind wasn't here. He'd told himself he'd give Amelia space. But space, he was realizing, had an ugly habit of turning into distance. That evening, he opened his laptop and stared at the half-finished email draft he'd been avoiding, a public invitation to the grand reopening gala for this very building. The list was full of city officials, donors, and press. Adding Amelia's name felt dangerous, but also inevitable. He didn't want to invite her as Ethan Whitmore, benefactor. He wanted to invite her as the man who had written her words in ink. The envelope arrived at the library the next morning, no return address, but unmistakably his handwriting. Amelia found it on her desk when she returned from shelving books. Inside was a single card. Amelia, I'm opening the Whitmore Hall this Friday evening. It's the only place I can think of where I can say everything without hiding. Will you come? She stared at it for a long time. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't anonymous. It was a direct request, and she knew accepting meant stepping into his world completely. A world she had only glimpsed in headlines and polished photographs. Friday came faster than she expected. She almost didn't go. She even stood in front of her mirror twice with her coat on, keys in hand, before sitting back down on her bed. Then she remembered one of his early letters, the one about courage not being the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. She left. Whitmore Hall glowed like something out of a dream, its stained glass windows throwing warm colors across the steps. Inside, the air was a mixture of candlelight, soft piano music, and the hum of dozens of conversations. Amelia felt out of place instantly, silk gowns, tuxedos, polished shoes everywhere she looked. But then she saw him. Ethan, standing by the staircase, scanning the room like he was looking for something, or someone. When his eyes landed on her, the stiffness in his shoulders eased. He crossed the room quickly, his hand brushing hers in greeting before he said softly, "You came." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But you did," he said. "And that's what matters." He led her away from the crowd, toward the grand staircase. "I meant what I wrote. I wanted to speak to you here because I want you to see all of me, the man who restores buildings, who hosts events, who lives in this world, and the man who writes you letters." She looked around at the ornate room, at the people who clearly admired him. "It's a lot," she said honestly. "This isn't my world." "It could be," he said, not as an offer but as a possibility. "If you want it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he added, "I've been hiding behind paper and ink because I was afraid of what would happen if I stepped out from behind it. But I can't ask you to trust me if I'm not willing to stand here, completely visible, risking that you'll walk away." Her heart pulled in two directions at once, toward him and toward the safety of retreat. Before she could answer, someone from the press called his name, and he was momentarily swept into a conversation. She stood there watching him, confident, gracious, entirely himself, and realized this was the choice she'd been circling for days: walk away now, or step into his life knowing the weight of it. If you were Amelia, would you take the step into Ethan's world, or would you decide it's too different from your own? Be honest. How much does someone's lifestyle affect your decision to be with them? Ethan found her on the balcony. The ballroom stretched behind them, all golden light and polite laughter, but out here it was just the cool evening air, the faint hum of traffic below, and the city skyline spread out like a painted backdrop. "You slipped away," he said gently. "I needed a minute," Amelia replied. She kept her eyes on the horizon. "It's overwhelming." "I know." He stepped beside her, not crowding, just close enough that the warmth of him reached her through the chill. "This world, it's loud. And you're used to quiet." She gave a small, wry smile. "Quiet doesn't mean lonely." "I never thought it did," he said. "But I also never wanted you to feel like you had to stand on the edges of mine." They stood in silence for a few moments. The city lights flickered like constellations on the ground. Finally, Amelia turned to him. "You asked if the connection we built was worth forgiving how it started." He held her gaze. "And I think," she hesitated, searching for the words. "I think the person who wrote those letters is the same person standing here. And maybe the only way to know for sure is to give you the chance to prove it." The tension in his shoulders eased, replaced by something softer, hope, unguarded. "I can do that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. No envelope this time. Just words. "Now, while I'm here to see your face when you read them." Amelia unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar, looping and sure. No more hiding. No more halfway. "Just me if you'll have me, in every room, in every quiet, in every crowded place, for as long as you'll let me." When she looked up, his expression was open, waiting, not assuming. "I'll hold you to that," she said. Back inside, they rejoined the crowd. The music had shifted to something slower, and before she could think too much, Ethan extended his hand. "One dance." She hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it. His hand was steady at her back, and for the first time since she'd found that hidden page, she felt herself relax fully into his presence. It wasn't the ballroom, the music, or the eyes on them that mattered. It was the simple quiet fact that they were here, together, without walls of paper between them. Weeks later, the library felt warmer somehow. The letters had stopped arriving, not because they'd lost their magic, but because she no longer needed to wonder who wrote them. Sometimes Ethan would still scribble a note and leave it between the pages of a returned book, but now she got to see his grin when she found it. And once, on a rainy Tuesday, he came in without a word, sat across from her at the desk, and slid a scrap of paper across. Rain on library windows. And you. She smiled, tucking it into the drawer where she kept the first letter he'd ever written. If you've made it this far, this means you find this story intriguing. Do give us a like and subscribe to our channel, so you don't get to miss subsequent heart-tightening love stories. 3 months later, spring had softened the city. The trees lining the street outside the library were heavy with pale blossoms, and the afternoon light poured in through tall windows, turning the dust in the air into slow-moving gold. Amelia sat at the reference desk, stamping a stack of returns. She was humming without realizing it. The bell over the door chimed, and in walked Ethan, not in a tailored suit this time, but in rolled-up sleeves, hair slightly mussed. In his hands, he carried a small brown box tied with twine. She raised a brow. No books to return. Something better. He set the box on the counter. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a leather-bound journal. The first page was already written on, in that familiar looping script. A blank page is not an empty thing, it's a promise. Let's fill this one together. Beneath it, he had drawn a small heart in the margin. That evening, after closing, they walked the few blocks to the park where the cherry trees were in bloom. Amelia brought the journal. They sat on a bench, passing it back and forth, writing little notes, sketches, inside jokes. Some pages held full paragraphs, others were just single words. One simply read, "Home." And though no one else would ever read these pages, Amelia knew, these were the real letters now. The ones written in the open, in a life they were building day by day. Months later, a new patron came to the library, shy and uncertain, sliding a book across the counter with a folded slip of paper tucked inside. Amelia smiled, remembering her own discovery months ago. She passed the paper back with a wink. "Careful," she said, "letters like that can change everything." And so, the lonely librarian who once believed love belonged only in the pages she shelved, found it walking through her own door, written first in secret ink, and then in the open air of everyday life. Ethan's letters had begun as whispers from the shadows, but they ended in a life they could read together, one day at a time. And Amelia, who once lived in the quiet corners, learned that some stories aren't meant to stay bound, they're meant to be lived. So maybe love doesn't always arrive the way you expect. Sometimes it's hidden between page 327 and 328. Sometimes it's waiting at the circulation desk with a shy smile. And sometimes, it's both. Thanks for watching, and remember, the best stories aren't just read, they're lived.